It was in Colorado, 1882, on a Tuesday afternoon in July, that he made the remark while leaning on a fence post near the creek. She was wringing out a shirt with such effortless skill that everything she did appeared simple. He hadn't given it any thought or practice. The words escaped the way honest words often do, before reason could intervene. You know, Clara, any man who marries you will be incredibly fortunate. He anticipated a chuckle or a humble dismissal, the sort of reaction that allows the moment to pass without courage being required. But instead, she froze. Color gradually rose to her cheeks, as if a lamp were being brightened. She took her time before meeting his gaze. When she finally did, her face held an unfamiliar look, vulnerable, scared, and resolute simultaneously. In a soft voice, she answered, "I was hoping you'd be the one." Ethan Calloway, age 28, operated a small cattle ranch at Millhaven, Colorado's western boundary. People always called him Ethan. His full name, James Ethan, had only ever been spoken by his mother, who had passed away 6 years ago. He was an uncomplicated fellow, diligent in work and true to his promises. He settled his obligations, and each night lay down exhausted, content in the knowledge that he'd accomplished what was required. What he lacked, and had silently ceased to hope for, was a person waiting at home. To the east lived the Harmons, Daniel, his wife Ruth, and their daughter Clara. They were decent folk, the sort who lent a helping hand without ever bringing it up later. At 24, Clara Harmon was up before dawn each day. She managed the household, looked after the garden, helped with laundry, and prepared 3 daily meals. Despite all that, she still made time to take soup to old Mr. Cent, Briggs up the road whenever his back gave out. She handled everything without grumbling or making a fuss, as naturally as others breathe. Ethan had been acquainted with her for a long time. He'd talked with her many times and shared meals at her family's home. He'd observed her labor and idly concluded that Daniel Harmon had brought up a fine girl. But it wasn't until that summer that he truly saw what was in front of him. The boundary fence dividing his land from the Harmons followed a narrow stream edged with cottonwoods. 2 stretches had been destroyed by spring flooding. On a July Tuesday, he was mending those very parts when Clara came to the creek to do laundry. Initially, she didn't notice him. Placing her basket by the water, she started washing with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Her sleeves were pushed up past her elbows, and her hair was loosely pinned with strands falling at her neck. She hummed softly, the tune almost lost beneath the water's sound. He continued with the fence post. He wasn't exactly watching her, though he was, but in a way that wouldn't have made either uncomfortable. It was simply the natural pull of your gaze toward motion and life amid a quiet landscape. She worked swiftly, now and then glancing at the mountains with a subtle, private look he couldn't decipher. Eventually, she spotted him. "Morning, Ethan." "Morning, Clara." He gestured toward the fence. "Spring floods." "That section always goes," she replied. "Papa's been planning to raise our posts as well." For a few minutes, they exchanged small talk, the weather, the livestock, whether Mr. Briggs's back was any better. She returned to her laundry, and he resumed his fence repair. The stream flowed between them while the cottonwoods rustled gently in the breeze. As Ethan hammered a post into the earth, he realized for the first time in ages that he wasn't completely alone. Millhaven hosted a summer gathering on the final Saturday of July. Such an occasion held great importance in a small town. It offered a chance to catch up with everyone, be noticed, and dance poorly to fine music. It was also time for community business that the rest of the year left no room for. Old Carson played the fiddle. There was more food than the county could eat, and an atmosphere crackled with the excitement of people who rarely gathered. When Ethan walked in, the Harmons were already present. Daniel wore his finest jacket, and Ruth had styled her hair neatly. Clara was dressed in a plain, spotless light blue gown that looked just right somehow. She was arranging the dessert table, chatting and laughing with total composure. Within 20 minutes of the music starting, 3 men had invited her to dance. From across the hall, Ethan observed it all. He danced a single dance with the widow Morrison, keeping a look he'd call indifferent. She was a skilled dancer and a reasonable woman, and she came right out and said he'd had his eyes on Clara Harmon the whole night. "I wasn't staring," he replied. "Ethan," she said evenly, "I've known you since you were 11. "You have been staring," she said, and he shifted the conversation. Later, strolling home beneath the stars, he reflected sincerely. Clara Harmon, his neighbor, was kind and competent, and he halted mid-step because she was someone he wished to see daily. He hadn't realized that until now, but once he did, it felt undeniable. For a long while, something had been true before he finally got smart enough to face it head-on. He lingered on the dark road, taking in the sound of crickets. It was like discovering something he never realized was missing. Quietly, things had begun moving in Clara Harmon's direction. In August, old Mr. Briggs's back took a turn for the worse, so Clara started bringing him meals every other day. Ethan happened to notice her passing by on the road with a basket one day, and without a second thought, he climbed down from the barn roof he was fixing and offered to accompany her. A brief look of surprise crossed her face before it settled into something smoother. "You really don't have to," she told him. "I know that," he replied, "but I want to." So they covered the half-mile under the warm morning sun, and Ethan found himself realizing what he ought to have known long ago. Clara Harmon was wonderful to be around. She had her own views, calm, thoughtful ones, shared freely but never pushed on anyone. Nothing escaped her attention. The new soft bank at the Second Creek crossing, the Henderson corn that was coming up thin. She also understood what that would mean for the county come harvest time. Her humor was dry and unhurried, and it crept up on you. During the hour they spent with old Briggs, Clara warmed up his soup and made sure the fire was tended. Briggs had firm opinions and not much in the way of social tact. Right there in front of Clara, he informed Ethan that any man who couldn't see what was plainly before him was a fool. Clara flushed crimson and suddenly remembered something pressing in the kitchen. Ethan met the old man's gaze and said softly, "I'm making progress on that." A grunt came from Briggs that likely signaled approval. As they walked home, neither brought up his words, yet the quiet between them was comfortable and warm, full, not empty. At the fork where their ways parted, Clara gave him a small, honest smile. "Thanks for walking with me," she said. "It's much better with company." He followed her with his eyes as she headed to the Harmon place and thought, "Yes, it certainly is." It was Tuesday once more, and Ethan was starting to believe that Tuesdays meant something. While he inspected the mended fence, he caught the sound of her at the creek. She carried a bigger load this time and, he realized, was singing to herself, not putting on a show, just singing softly and freely. He lingered a beat longer than necessary, the way a bird does when it forgets anyone might be watching. There was the blue sky, the cottonwoods, the murmur of the water, and Clara Harmon. She went about her everyday tasks with a natural grace she didn't appear to know she had. Catching sight of him, she lifted a hand. He made his way over to the fence. They chatted about the weather, the livestock, and Henderson's corn. A comfortable lull followed the sort that comes between two people with no pressure to break the quiet. He watched her wring out a shirt. Her arms were strong, her motions exact, and she did it all without a trace of self-consciousness. His mind was on Briggs's words, on something Mrs. Morrison had told him, and on what he'd confessed to himself back on the road in July. Then, unexpectedly, without any rehearsal and before his caution could intervene, the words came out, "You know, Clara, the man who finally marries you will be one very fortunate fellow." He meant it simply as a truthful remark, and he anticipated she'd just laugh it away, but instead she froze. Her hands stayed fixed on the shirt. A faint warmth crept into her cheeks, nothing theatrical, just a slow glow like a lamp being turned up. She didn't look at him right away, then she did. He had never seen that look on her face before, open, fearful, and resolved all at once. In a very quiet voice, she said, "I was hoping it would be you." The creek continued to flow, the cottonwoods kept rustling, and a hawk crossed the sky above them without any hurry. Ethan stood on his side of the fence, knowing that something between them had just changed for good. He wasn't certain he'd want it undone. "Clara," he began, and then, because he was a man who spoke his mind plainly, added, "I meant every word." Her gaze remained steady on him. "I know you did," she said. "That's exactly why I said what I did. I've had you on my mind since July." "The social," she noted. "Even before that, likely I just hadn't recognized it." She glanced at the shirt in her hands, then placed it carefully back into the basket. "I've been thinking about you for a good deal longer than July." Her tone carried that dry wit of hers, surfacing even now. "You were somewhat behind me." He laughed, not expecting to. Sorry, he said. You don't owe me an apology, she replied. But you made it. They stood on opposite sides of the fence in the summer sun. It struck Ethan as strange how a person could be so near close enough to talk with every week and still take so long to truly see. After a moment, he realized the feeling stirring in him was gratitude. Would you allow me to come call on you properly? He asked. I'd like to have a word with your father. She looked at him for a moment, then lifted her basket. He likes you, she said simply. For about a year, he's been hoping you'd make your way around to it. She set off for the Harmon house, and Ethan stayed by the fence for quite a while. Once she was out of sight, he felt like a man who'd just missed the worst mistake of his life. The next evening, he arrived in a clean shirt with his hair combed. He was more jittery than he'd been at 16, when he had to confess to his father that he'd lost 2 head of cattle in a storm. Daniel Harmon was already on the porch when Ethan arrived, a clear sign to Ethan Cal that Clara had mentioned something. Harmon was a large, quiet man with a gray beard and eyes that took everything in without commenting right away. He motioned to the empty chair beside him, and they both sat watching the last of the sunset over the western hills. I'd like to call on Clara, Ethan said, if I have your permission. Harmon was silent for a moment, then asked, What took you so long? Ethan looked at him. I'm asking sincerely, Harmon said. Ruth and I have been watching you work this out for 2 years. We were starting to wonder whether we'd have to say something to you directly. I'm slow, Ethan said. Harmon remarked. You're steady, softening his earlier point. Gazing at the hills, he added, Clara never requests anything unnecessary, yet she merits a man who truly perceives her, who understands her genuine nature. I do see her, Ethan replied in a low voice. Harmon studied him briefly, then gave a single nod. We usually have supper at 6, he said. Ruth always puts out a fine meal. That week, Ethan joined the Harmons for dinner 4 times. On the last of those nights, Clara and he strolled to the property's boundary, lingering in the fading light to discuss the ranch, their plans, and matters both trivial and profound. Do you find happiness here? He asked, in this way of living. She truly pondered it. Happiness, I believe, is largely built, she said, rather than discovered. Those who hunt for it elsewhere tend to overlook what's already before them. Turning to him, she asked, And you? I believe, he said with caution, that I'm becoming much happier. October came in crisp and radiant. Their romance advanced at a tempo suited to 2 folks who also managed their own lands, unfolding in the in-between moments. Dinners shared, Sunday afternoons, and strolls to the creek and back. He picked wildflowers from the north pasture for her, not purchased, simply ones he'd spotted and figured she'd appreciate. She preserved them quietly, without fuss. She showed him how to bake apple pie. His first attempts were clumsy, yet she stayed patient, and gradually he improved. She admitted that patience didn't come naturally to her, but he made it seem effortless. Those sideways remarks, offered without meeting his gaze, lingered in his thoughts for days. Without a word, he mended the stubborn gate on the Harmon's land. 2 weeks later, Daniel brought it up, his handshake conveying far more than any verbal thanks. Then, in mid-October, an event he kept from her occurred. Crossing the field toward the Harmon house for dinner, he halted not because something was amiss, but because something was right. And that terrified him more than any mishap ever could. Standing in the darkness, with the house lights glowing ahead, he fully grasped what he was heading towards. It wasn't merely dinner or even Clara, it was the desire itself, the authentic sort that could be taken away. Long ago, he'd given up wanting anything outright, since outright wanting invited outright loss. And he'd suffered enough to understand the price. He remained there for 10 minutes, then pressed on regardless. Clara was unaware of his pause. She opened the door just before he could knock, as she always caught the sound of his approach across the field. You're late, the biscuits are cooling, she said. He came in, enveloped by warmth and the aroma of supper, and met her gaze, thinking. That night, he realized, this was what he had nearly denied himself. Over dinner, she voiced something that had occupied his thoughts for weeks, that conversing with him felt easier than with anyone she'd known for years. Why do you suppose that is? He inquired. She reflected. I believe you genuinely pay attention, she said. Most folks are just biding time until they can talk. He gazed at her from across the table. I'm picking that up from you, he told her. She gave that subtle, straightforward smile. Well, she replied, you're quick to learn when you put your mind to it. In November, he proposed at the fence near the creek. He'd envisioned a grander scene, the ridge overlooking the valley, but with the sunset at his back, dressing it up felt wrong when the moment arrived. The creek held their earliest honest words, making it the natural place to return. The cottonwoods had turned golden and were dropping their leaves. The air carried autumn's first true chill, and Clara wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. In his pocket lay the ring his mother's, a modest silver band set with a tiny stone which he'd carried for 3 weeks, awaiting the perfect chance. At last, he concluded that the right moment is the one you forge yourself. Clara, he called. She turned around. Standing before her, he spoke directly, as he'd learned she liked. I realize I was slow, he began. I know I was slower than I should have been to recognize what was right before me. But now I see it. Every day, I see you clearly. I want to keep seeing you each day for the rest of my life. I want to create something with you, a home, a family, a shared existence. He stopped, taking a breath. I would be truly honored if you'd marry me. She gazed at him for a long while, eyes glistening, wearing a smile so sincere it had no place to conceal itself. Ethan Calloway, she said, you certainly took your time. Does that mean yes? That means an unequivocal yes, she replied. There by the creek, beneath the golden cottonwoods, he slipped his mother's ring onto her finger. She gazed at it briefly, only for a moment. Then she lifted her eyes to him, her expression reflecting not the ring, but the future it symbolized. He kissed her for the first time. The creek flowed past them, as it always had, both unconcerned and constant. A leaf or two drifted down from the cottonwoods into the November breeze. That winter proved the finest Ethan had yet known, not due to ease. For winters on the Colorado Plateau never came easy. There were cattle to tend, fences to inspect, wood to chop and pile. Yet now he had dinner at the Harmons twice weekly and chilly strolls home with Clara by his side. The certainty of spring's arrival felt as solid and comforting as a hearty blaze. That winter, he took on various projects, fixing the kitchen for real and laying a new floor in the main room. He also added a second east-facing window to let in the morning sun. He kept it from Clara, doing it simply because the house now belonged to her as well, even though she didn't realize it. Upon hearing of their engagement, Ruth Harmon wept with the good sort of tears, pure, overwhelming relief. Next, she took Clara's hands, glanced at the ring, then at Ethan, and whispered, I always knew it would be you. From across the room, Daniel gave a confirming nod. He'd known it as well. When Pete was informed the following morning, he stared at Ethan for a beat and muttered, huh. Finally, that exact word came from 4 other people that week. Ethan began to realize his emotions had been far more obvious than he'd thought back in February. Clara visited the ranch house alongside her mother, planning where everything would be placed. In the kitchen, she noticed the newly added window with morning light streaming through it. A brief silence fell before she said, You did this without saying a word to me. He said yes. Why the east window? To give you pleasant morning light, he answered. She fell silent once more. Then she crossed the kitchen, grasped his hand, and held it as one holds something meant to be kept forever. Thank you, just that, with no theatrics. He knew the gratitude wasn't about the window itself. It was for what the window represented. He'd imagined her during the bleak winter, even before she'd arrived, and had prepared a space to welcome her. Huh. That's what love truly is. Love doesn't make a fuss. It simply faces east in silent patience. Their wedding took place on an April Saturday, as cottonwoods were sprouting leaves and the hills turned green. The sky was that vivid blue that arrives after a week of spring showers. Nearly half the town of Millhaven attended. Clara's ivory cotton dress, crafted by her mother, featured delicate embroidery around the collar. The ceremony wasn't fancy. It didn't pretend to be anything beyond itself. Clara walked toward him, her father's arm linked through hers, her expression calm and sure. Ethan thought, I can't believe I took so long to figure this out. Reverend Mills, known to perform better brief ceremonies, officiated. When her father, Daniel Harmon, was asked who gave this woman away, his voice faltered a bit, drawing a ripple of compassion through several rows and even from a couple of men. Ethan spoke his vows straight to Clara, for her ears only, not for the crowd. She did the same. The marriage was sealed, and old Carson struck up a fiddle tune. While the sun sank, guests feasted and danced on the grass. Later that evening, inside the ranch house boasting the east window and freshly laid floor, Clara took a seat at the kitchen table. Hair loose, fingers curled around a mug of tea, she glanced across at Ethan. Her face wore a brand new look, calm and steady as she announced, "We're going to be very happy here." "You know I know," he replied. "I think I've known for some time." "You were slower than me," she teased. "But I made it," he said. She smiled and agreed. "You made it." What came after was constructed out of unremarkable days and genuine effort. There existed a distinct depth in two individuals who kept choosing one another, again and again. The ranch gradually expanded. A new barn in year 2, improved pasture in year 3. Clara managed finances since her knack for numbers outshone Ethan's, and unspoken truth both recognized. Additionally, she set up a tool and supply borrowing program among Millhaven's women for tough times. It seemed a straightforward notion, but it was quietly a piece of local leadership discussed for years afterwards. Their first baby, born in the spring of year 3, was a son named Daniel, after her father. He came into the world with loud lungs and decisive opinions on everything. Clara claimed the trait came from Ethan. Ethan insisted it was from Clara. Likely, it was a blend. Their daughter arrived 2 years later, named Margaret, in honor of Ethan's mother. She inherited Clara's eyes and Ethan's stubborn streak, a blend that would benefit her throughout life. One Tuesday evening in the fall of their 5th year, Ethan stood by the creekside fence. The same fence mended once more following yet another spring flood, a recurring chore. Clara arrived with the 2 children, Daniel sprinting ahead while Margaret toddled along with fierce resolve but little velocity. Spotting him, Clara lifted her hand. He swung over the fence and headed toward them. Daniel instantly insisted on being hoisted onto his shoulders, and Margaret, with the unyielding solemnity of a 2-year-old, made the same request. Some bargaining was needed. Eventually, the worn-out kids leaned into them. As the day's final light faded, Clara laid her head on his shoulder and asked, "Do you know what's been on my mind? I can't stop thinking back to that first summer at the creek and what you told me." "The one who marries you will be fortunate," he recalled. "You were correct," she responded. "And indeed, she is very fortunate." He met her gaze. "I'm the one who's lucky." "We're both lucky," she said matter-of-factly. "We're both lucky," he echoed. The cottonwoods had once more turned gold in October, dependable as all else on this land that now belonged to them. High peaks of the mountains captured the fading sunlight. Millhaven County remained itself gorgeously aloof, populated by folks determined to shape meaningful lives. Ethan Calloway wrapped his arms around his family in the amber afternoon glow, grasping with the profound awareness of someone who knows the price of things how close he'd come to losing this. A bone-deep gratitude filled him for making it in time. His arrival was delayed beyond proper timing, yet he wound up precisely where he belonged. Ethan wasn't a coward, simply human. He'd grown so accustomed to avoiding direct desires that he failed to recognize when those desires had begun. This isn't a flaw particular to him. It's something most of us can identify within ourselves when being truthful. As for Clara, she had known for years. She bore it silently, no resentment, making no show for anyone. And when the opportunity arose, she gave an honest reply. Even though she could have dodged, that required greater bravery than any act of Ethan's. At that fence, both of them opted for truth. Everything else was set in motion by that single incident at a Colorado creek in the summer of 1882. Life's most significant treasures aren't usually concealed. They're often nearby, doing simple chores like washing clothes along a creek. I'm telling you to lift your head from your current distractions and truly see them. Don't take 7 years to notice. I appreciate you spending this time writing with me today. No matter where you are in the world, I'm so grateful you joined. Until next time, don't stop writing.